And who better to answer that than Mr. Parthasarathy first? If you were still in the Foreign Office today, how would this change the way you worked?
It wouldn't change at all.
Why is that?
Because we are not indiscreet like the Americans, circulating cables about other heads of government to 5,000 people. At best, 4 or 5 people who are known to be discreet will see these messages. And they will then decide at very high level clearance of what becomes public. The Americans have made a tamasha of diplomacy. No, the British don't do it, the Russians don't do it. The circulation of these telegrams is ridiculous. You don't circulate telegrams like this to people with levels of sergeant in the army, who one of them was supposed to have accused of having.
So you're saying it's a basic flaw in the American system?
There is a basic flaw. They will have to correct it. They do have problems because of keeping Congress informed, but they will certainly have to correct the system. And as for the contents, I have read their telegrams when they are released after 15 or 20 years or 25 years. No big deal. It's about the same. They are very, very frank. It can be embarrassing to foreign leaders, but luckily they normally do it after 30 or 40 years when the leaders are dead. So it does not matter.
This time that's not the case.
This time that's not the case.
All right, we're going to look at the contents in a little more detail, but what are your first thoughts about this, Sam Miller?
I actually do
Is this going to change the way foreign governments interact with American diplomats?
I think certainly it will for the time being. I think there's a lot of embarrassment around. I don't think, as Parthasarathy has said, that there have been huge, huge surprises in here. But we've got a real genuine insight into how American foreign policy works and almost the culture of American foreign policy. I think the whole secrecy issue is a huge one, and I wouldn't be quite so relaxed as my colleague here on the left about it, simply because I think the way the digital revolution has happened means that people can get to places where you think they can't. So actually the most powerful people in most of our organizations are no longer the bosses. They're the people who have access to the servers. They have the potential to disrupt what you're doing. They're the people who have the potential to access information that is critical to the way you work. And that's true for companies, it's true for countries, it's really true for most of us.
You've brought up an interesting issue, and since both you and Swapan are journalists on this panel, let me ask you that there's been this whole debate about whether it has been useful or whether WikiLeaks should have even put this information out there. As a journalist, what would you have done?
Yes, I would have put it out. I think you need to think very carefully before you do these things. I think the way that they co-opted 5 leading world newspapers was very important in the way that they approached the subject. It's very important that everything that comes out is put in some kind of context, and so far as they can, they should make sure that they're not directly putting people's lives in danger. That's a very hard thing to do, and journalists do sometimes do that on completely other stories. So I think it's right that it should be done. You know, as a journalist, I want those stories. Of course I do. They're the stories one goes around hoping desperately they're going to come one's way. So yes, absolutely.
Swapan, do you think it serves a purpose to know all this information? Is it too much information?
Well, a former British Foreign Secretary this week was asked this question, and he said, look, there's a difference between the public interests and the interests of the public. Now, in terms of what excites people, I think the WikiLeaks certainly does excite people. And there are, I mean, I wouldn't say the leaks are uniform in terms of giving us information. But certainly in terms of West Asia, some of the explosive information there suggests that what many of the Arab leaders say in public in terms of posturing is completely different from what they say in private.
They're very interesting to read, even if it's about things we know about, like Pakistan.
You know, it confirms a lot of suspicions, it confirms a lot of existing theories. Nothing very, very sensational, apart from the fact that Colonel Gaddafi has a voluptuous blonde escorting him. This was what I sort of learned. Now, as far as journalists are concerned, I think as what has appeared so far, I don't think really compromises any lives. But the earlier batch of WikiLeaks certainly had cables on Afghanistan, which would definitely indicate who the informants were. And those people have been targeted by the Taliban. And, you know, so it's really it's a Hobson's choice for the journalist. On one hand, you think you should put out information which is available to you. It's available in the public domain in any case. So you might as well sift through it and do it. On the other hand, the implications of this could at times be hazardous. It's not an easy call to take, but I think people have to sort of wait, and ultimately it's a sort of case-by-case
on a case-by-case basis.